The rain poured heavily on New Terra, the capital city of the Terran Alliance. Sergeant Daniel Carter, now a retired soldier, sat alone in a small bar, staring at his drink. The holographic news played in the background, talking about rising tensions between humanity and the Dravashi Empire. But Daniel wasn't listening. His mind was lost in the past. Raxus 4, a war-torn planet where he once fought. A place of blood, fire, and death. But also the place where he had saved her. The little Dravashi girl, alone in the ruins, crying as the city burned around her. He had disobeyed orders that day, choosing to carry her to safety instead of retreating with his squad. He had wrapped her in his jacket, shielded her from the chaos, and whispered, "You're safe now, kid." And then he had to leave. He never knew what happened to her. Did she survive? Was she taken by her people? Did she remember him? He sighed and took another sip of his drink. It was all in the past now. Or so he thought. A soft beep from his wrist communicator snapped him out of his thoughts. A new message. But the sender was unknown. He frowned and tapped the screen. A single line of text appeared. "I never forgot you. Find me." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His hands tightened around the glass. The words were simple, but they hit him like a punch to the gut. Could it be her? His fingers moved quickly, tracing the source of the message. It had come from Dravashi Prime, the heart of the enemy's empire. His instincts screamed trap. No human was welcome there. If he went, he might never come back. But deep inside, he knew the truth. He had to go. For the first time in years, the ghost of a memory had come back to life, and he wasn't going to ignore it. The stars stretched endlessly before Daniel Carter as his stolen freighter Void Runner slipped through the darkness of space. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound in the cockpit. His fingers hovered over the controls, his mind racing. The message had come from Dravashi Prime, the heart of the enemy's empire, a place no human could enter without facing danger. The war between humanity and the Dravashi had ended in an uneasy truce, but hostility still remained. If the Dravashi found him, they wouldn't ask questions. They would kill him. But the message, "I never forgot you. Find me." It had to be her. The little Dravashi girl he had saved on Raxus 4 all those years ago. She was alive, and she was calling for him. Daniel leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly. Why now? Why, after all these years, had she reached out to him? And why from Dravashi Prime, one of the most dangerous places in the galaxy for a human? He didn't have answers, but he was going to find them. The Void Runner's stealth systems flickered as it approached Dravashi Prime. From space, the planet looked like a glowing jewel. Massive cities spread across its dark surface, each pulsing with alien energy. It was nothing like the human worlds he knew. This was enemy territory. Daniel adjusted his disguise. His armor was hidden under a thick trader's cloak, and his face was covered by a holomask, altering his features to look more alien. It wasn't perfect, but it might buy him enough time. The ship's computer beeped. A communication request. Unknown vessel. A deep alien voice growled. "Identify yourself." Daniel forced his voice to stay calm. "Merchant vessel, Sarian 5. Requesting clearance for trade." A long silence. His hands tightened on the controls. Then, finally, the response came. "Clearance granted. Proceed to Dock 17." Daniel exhaled. Step 1 was complete. As he stepped out of his ship, the alien city swallowed him whole. Dravashi warriors, towering and clad in dark armor, patrolled the streets. The air was thick with the scent of burning fuel and spices from street vendors. Strange holographic symbols glowed on the walls, their meaning lost to him. He walked carefully, his every movement calculated. He had arranged to meet a contact, an information broker who might know something about the message. A shadow slipped beside him. A small, cloaked figure. "You are looking for someone," the figure whispered. Daniel's muscles tensed. "Who are you?" The hood lifted slightly, revealing sharp, reptilian features. Someone who knows the girl you seek. His heart pounded. Take me to her. The figure hesitated, then nodded. Daniel had come too far to turn back now. Daniel followed the cloaked figure through the dark alleys of Dravashi Prime. The city was alive with strange sounds, deep alien voices, the hum of hovercrafts, the distant clang of machinery. He kept his head down, his hand resting near his hidden weapon. If this was a trap, he had to be ready. The figure stopped in front of a small, hidden entrance between two towering buildings. With a quick glance around, they pressed a panel on the wall. The metal door slid open with a quiet hiss. Inside, the figure said. Daniel hesitated. He didn't trust this. But if Elin was really here, he had no choice. Taking a deep breath, he stepped through the doorway. The room was dimly lit, filled with old tech and scattered datapads. A single figure stood near the back, facing away from him. She wore an elegant dark cloak, her hood covering most of her features. But even in the low light, Daniel could see the slight curve of her Dravashi horns. Shorter than most, a sign of youth. She turned slowly, and for the first time in years, Daniel saw her face. It was her. The little girl he had once saved on Raxus 4, now a grown woman. Elin. Her golden eyes widened as she looked at him. You came, she whispered. Daniel took a step forward, studying her carefully. She was taller now, her once small and fragile form replaced by a confident, poised stance. There was strength in her gaze, but also something else. Fear. I got your message, Daniel said. His voice was steady, but inside, his heart was racing. What's going on, Elin? She glanced at the cloaked figure beside them. Leave us. The figure bowed slightly and disappeared into the shadows. Once they were alone, Elin let out a slow breath. I wasn't sure if you would remember me. Daniel gave a small, tired smile. Hard to forget the girl I carried through a war zone. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Elin's expression hardened. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I need your help, Daniel. My people, the Dravashi Empire, are planning something terrible. A war against humanity. And I'm trapped in the middle of it. Daniel frowned. What do you mean, trapped? She hesitated, then finally said the words that made Daniel's blood run cold. I am Lady Elin of the Imperial Court, the adopted daughter of High Chancellor Vexer. Daniel's fists clenched. Vexer, the ruthless leader of the Dravashi. The one responsible for some of the worst attacks against human colonies. You're his daughter, he asked, disbelief in his voice. Not by choice, she said bitterly. He took me in after the war, trained me, molded me into something I never wanted to be. She looked away. And now he wants to use me as a tool, to start a war with your people. Daniel exhaled sharply. This was worse than he had imagined. Elin met his gaze again. I sent that message because you are the only one I trust, the only one who ever showed me kindness. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Help me escape, before it's too late. Daniel's mind raced as he stared at Elin. The little girl he had once saved was now a Dravashi noble, caught in the center of a war she didn't want, and she was asking him to help her escape. This is insane, he muttered, rubbing his temple. Your people worship Vexer. If they find out you're betraying him, they'll kill me, Elin finished. Her golden eyes were serious. That's why I need to leave before it's too late. Daniel exhaled sharply. This was dangerous. Getting into Dravashi Prime was one thing. Getting out with a high-ranking noble, that was suicide. But he couldn't just walk away. Not after everything. You got a plan? He asked. Elin nodded. There's a transport ship leaving tomorrow. It's heading to a neutral system, if we can sneak on board. A loud beep interrupted her. Elin's face paled. She pulled out a small communicator from her cloak. A deep, cold voice filled the room. Lady Elin, your presence is required in the throne chamber. Immediately. It was Vexer. Elin quickly shut off the device. Her hands were shaking. "They're watching me," she whispered. "I have to go, or they'll suspect something." Daniel clenched his jaw. "I'll wait here. If you're not back in 2 hours, I'll come find you." She hesitated, then nodded. Before leaving, she turned to him one last time. "Be careful, Daniel," she said softly. "You're in more danger than you realize." Elin walked through the grand imperial palace, her heart pounding. Massive Dravashi warriors stood at attention, their piercing eyes tracking her every move. She forced herself to stay calm, to act like the obedient noble they expected her to be. The throne chamber doors slid open. Inside, High Chancellor Vexer sat on a towering black throne, his golden armor gleaming under the dim lights. His presence alone was suffocating. "Elin," Vexer said, his deep voice filled with authority. "You disappeared for hours. Why?" Elin bowed slightly. "I was preparing for tomorrow's ceremony, Father." Vexer studied her, his reptilian eyes narrowing. He was no fool. "You are lying," he said coldly. "I can feel it." Elin's breath caught. Had he found out? Vexer stood and stepped toward her. "You have been distracted lately. And now I sense something different about you." He tilted his head. "You remind me of the day I found you, broken and weak. Are you feeling weak again, child?" Elin forced herself to stay still. "No, Father. I am loyal to the Empire." Vexer studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Good," he said, "because war is coming, and I expect my daughter to be ready." Elin lowered her head, hiding the fear in her eyes. She had to escape tonight. Elin walked quickly through the palace halls, her heart pounding. Vexer knew something was wrong. He could sense her fear, her hesitation. She had lied to him. But for how long would he believe her? She had no time to waste. Tonight was her only chance to escape. As soon as she reached her chambers, she locked the door and activated a small communicator. "Daniel, it's happening tonight. Meet me at Dock 17 in 1 hour." There was a pause, then his voice came through. "Got it. Stay hidden until then." Elin clenched her fists. She would make it. She had to. Daniel moved through the lower city, staying in the shadows. His holomask flickered for a second, but he quickly adjusted it. If his disguise failed now, he wouldn't survive long. Dock 17 was heavily guarded. Too many Dravashi soldiers. This wouldn't be easy. He reached for his stolen ID chip and stepped forward, keeping his posture steady. A guard scanned him. "Cargo access only," the alien growled. Daniel nodded. "Got urgent supplies. Just a delivery." The guard glared at him, but the ID passed the scan. "Move along." Daniel exhaled slowly and walked inside. Now all he had to do was wait. Elin left her chambers, keeping her hood low. Every step felt dangerous. The palace guards were everywhere. If anyone stopped her, she had no excuse. She reached a side exit and slipped into the night. The cold air hit her face, and for the first time in years, she felt free. But just as she stepped forward, a loud alarm blared through the city. Her blood turned to ice. "Attention! Intruder alert! All soldiers report to lockdown positions." No, no. They knew. She ran. Daniel cursed under his breath as the alarm screamed across the dock. He pressed his communicator. "Elin, what happened?" "They found out." Her voice came through, breathless. "Guards are everywhere. I'm coming to you now." Daniel's mind raced. They needed a new plan. He looked around and spotted an old cargo hauler preparing for launch. It was heading toward a neutral sector. Perfect. "Elin, change course. Head for the eastern loading bay. I'll be waiting." "Got it." Elin sprinted through the streets, dodging patrols. Behind her, she could hear the roar of Dravashi warriors chasing her. She turned a corner and skidded to a stop. A massive figure stood in her path. Vexer. His golden eyes burned with fury. "Going somewhere, daughter." Elin's breath caught. She was trapped, and Daniel was still waiting for her. Elin froze. Vexor stood before her, his towering form blocking the path. His golden armor gleamed under the city lights, his reptilian eyes filled with cold fury. "You disappoint me, child," he said, his deep voice like a growl. "I gave you everything, and yet you try to run like a coward." Elin clenched her fists. "I never wanted to be part of your war." Vexor stepped closer, his presence suffocating. "You are Dravashi. War is in your blood. It is your destiny." "No," Elin whispered. "It's your destiny, not mine." Vexor exhaled sharply, disappointed. "Then you leave me no choice." Before Elin could react, Vexor moved. Faster than a shadow, he grabbed her wrist in an iron grip. She gasped, struggling, but he was too strong. "You belong to the Empire," he said coldly, "and you will not leave." Meanwhile, at the loading bay, Daniel was running out of time. The cargo hauler was about to leave, but Elin still wasn't there. Something was wrong. His communicator crackled. "Daniel, Vexor found me. Her voice cut off. Damn it. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, to get out while he still could. But he ignored them. He had come this far. He wasn't leaving without her. Steeling himself, he changed course, heading straight toward the palace. Back at the city square, Elin struggled, her heart pounding. She had to get free. Then she saw it, Vexor's wrist console. It controlled his armor's energy shields, if she could disable it. Thinking fast, she lunged forward instead of pulling away. The sudden move caught Vexor off guard. She slammed her knee into his side, and in the same motion, grabbed his console. With a sharp twist, she ripped it off. Vexor's eyes widened in shock. His shield flickered, then vanished. For the first time, he was vulnerable. Elin didn't hesitate. She spun and delivered a powerful kick to his chest. The mighty High Chancellor stumbled back, roaring in anger. She didn't wait. She turned and ran. At that moment, Daniel burst into the square. His eyes locked onto Elin. "Elin." She looked up, gasping. "Daniel, run." Vexor had recovered. His rage was terrifying. "You," he snarled, eyes locking onto Daniel. The human didn't waste time talking. He pulled out a stolen plasma pistol and fired. The shot hit Vexor's shoulder, making the Dravashi leader roar in pain. Daniel grabbed Elin's hand. "Move." Together, they raced through the city, alarms blaring behind them. The entire Dravashi army would soon be after them. And if they didn't escape now, they never would. Daniel and Elin ran through the city, their footsteps echoing in the dark alleys. Behind them, alarms blared, and the heavy sounds of Dravashi soldiers in pursuit grew louder. "We won't make it to the loading bay," Elin panted. Daniel's mind raced. They needed a new plan. Then he saw it, a parked hoverbike near a supply station. The owner, a Dravashi worker, had just stepped away. "Stay close," Daniel said. They dashed toward the bike. Daniel punched the control panel, forcing it to start. The vehicle roared to life. Elin jumped on behind him. "Go." The moment Daniel accelerated, energy blasts rained down behind them. Dravashi guards had spotted them. "Hold on," he shouted. Elin wrapped her arms around his waist as the bike shot forward, weaving through the streets. Laser fire streaked past them, hitting walls and shattering glass. The main gates of the city loomed ahead, but they were closing. "We'll never make it," Elin yelled. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Watch me." At the city gates, Dravashi guards were sealing the entrance, their weapons aimed. The gates were nearly shut. Only a tiny opening remained. Daniel didn't slow down. "Daniel," Elin cried. He pressed a button on the bike's panel. Boost activated. The hoverbike lurched forward, engines screaming. They shot through the gap, just as the gates slammed shut behind them. The sudden drop from the city's elevated platform made Elin's heart stop. They were falling. Outside the city, Daniel pulled up hard, forcing the hoverbike to stabilize just before hitting the rocky ground below. They skidded to a rough landing, the bike's engine smoking. For a moment, everything was silent except for their heavy breathing. Then Elin laughed weakly, relief flooding her face. "I can't believe that worked." Daniel smirked. "I'm full of bad ideas." But the moment of peace didn't last. A deep, rumbling sound filled the air. Elin turned, and her blood ran cold. Above them, in the night sky, a massive Dravashi warship was descending. "They're not letting us go that easily," Daniel muttered. Elin clenched her fists. "Then we need to leave this planet. Now." Daniel pointed to the distance. "My ship isn't far, if we can get to it." A loud explosion cut him off. The ground shook. They turned to see Dravashi dropships landing, soldiers pouring out. Daniel's face hardened. "They're coming." Elin grabbed his arm. "Then we fight our way through." She picked up a fallen soldier's plasma rifle and charged it. Daniel grinned. "Now that's the Elin I remember." As the Dravashi forces closed in, they stood side by side, ready to fight for their freedom. The night air vibrated with the roar of Dravashi dropships. Soldiers poured out, their weapons glowing in the darkness. Daniel and Elin stood back to back, gripping their weapons tightly. There was no running now. They had to fight. "Try not to die," Daniel muttered. Elin smirked. "You too." Then the battle began. The first wave of soldiers charged at them. Daniel fired first, his plasma pistol blasting through the nearest enemy's armor. The soldier collapsed, but more took his place. Elin moved like lightning, dodging a plasma shot and returning fire. Her stolen rifle lit up the battlefield, cutting down enemies with deadly precision. But the Dravashi were strong. They kept coming. One massive warrior swung a shock blade at Daniel. He barely dodged, the energy blade slicing through the air where his head had been. He kicked the soldier's knee, then shot him point blank. Elin took down two more, her golden eyes burning with determination. But then, a plasma grenade landed near them. "Move," Daniel shouted. They dived away just before the grenade exploded, sending shockwaves through the ground. Dust filled the air. Daniel coughed, trying to see through the smoke. "Elin." "I'm here," she answered, pushing herself up. But then, heavy footsteps. A shadow loomed over them. Vexer had arrived. His golden armor was scratched, but his rage burned stronger than ever. "You think you can escape me?" he growled. "You are nothing without the Empire." Elin clenched her fists. "I was never part of your empire." Vexer snarled. "Then you will die with this human." He raised his hand, and energy surged from his gauntlet. A powerful blast shot toward them. Daniel pushed Elin aside and took the full hit. The force sent him flying, his body slamming into a rock. Pain exploded through him. "Daniel!" Elin screamed. He tried to get up, but his vision blurred. Everything hurt. Vexer marched toward Elin, his towering form like a nightmare. She was alone now. "You are weak," he sneered, "like all humans." Elin's hand shook, but not with fear, with anger. She looked at Daniel, lying motionless. She looked at the monster who had stolen her childhood, and something inside her snapped. "I am not weak," she whispered. She charged forward, gun blazing. Vexer raised his arm to block, but Elin ducked, sliding beneath him. She twisted and fired a shot straight into his gauntlet. It exploded. Vexer roared in pain, clutching his arm. Elin stood over him, her rifle aimed at his chest. "This is where your rule ends." Vexer growled. "You wouldn't dare." A gunshot echoed. The gunshot echoed in the night. Vexer stumbled back, his golden armor cracked where the bullet had hit. He clutched his side, his reptilian face twisting in shock and pain. Elin stood firm, her plasma rifle still aimed. Her hands shook, but her eyes burned with determination. "You," Vexer growled, his voice filled with rage and disbelief. "You would betray your own blood." Aylin took a slow step forward. "You were never my family." She fired again. The blast hit Vexer's chest, sending him crashing to the ground. His massive form hit the dirt with a heavy thud. For the first time in her life, Aylin was free. She turned to Daniel. He was struggling to sit up, his face pale with pain. Aylin ran to him, dropping her rifle. "Daniel." She knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his injuries. He gave a weak grin. "I think that hurt more than it looked." Aylin let out a breath, half a laugh, half a sob. "Idiot, you almost died." Daniel chuckled, then winced. "Yeah, well, wouldn't be the first time." Aylin's golden eyes softened. "I won't let it happen again." She helped him to his feet. They weren't safe yet. The remaining Dravashi soldiers were watching, frozen in shock. Their great leader, Vexer, lay defeated. They hesitated. Without Vexer, who would lead them? Then, one by one, they lowered their weapons. Some turned and flowed into the night. Others fell to their knees, surrendering. Aylin exhaled. It was over. A distant rumble reminded her that they still had one last mission: escape. She wrapped an arm around Daniel's waist, helping him walk. "Come on. Your ship is close." "Right?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, just over that ridge." They moved quickly, stepping over fallen soldiers, past the remains of the battle. The night smelled of smoke and burned metal. The ship came into view, a sleek, black human fighter. Aylin's breath caught. "You really came here alone." Daniel grinned weakly. "You think I'd let you rot in this place?" She smiled softly, tightening her grip on him. "You're an idiot. And you're welcome." They reached the ship and stumbled inside. Aylin helped Daniel into the co-pilot's seat, then rushed to the controls. "Can you fly?" he asked, wincing. Aylin's hands moved over the holographic dashboard. "I've been waiting for this moment my whole life." The engines roared to life. Outside, the Dravashi who remained watched in silence as the ship lifted off. The sky opened before them, endless and free. Aylin looked at Daniel. He smirked. "Let's go home." The ship soared into the sky, leaving the burning city behind. The planet shrank beneath them, its dark surface fading into the endless stars. Aylin gripped the controls, her hands steady but her heart racing. She had dreamed of this moment, escaping the Dravashi, leaving her past behind. But now that it was real, it felt almost unbelievable. She glanced at Daniel. He sat in the co-pilot seat, his face pale from his injuries, but his blue eyes still held that familiar spark of determination. "Are we clear?" he asked, his voice weak but steady. Aylin checked the scanners. Red lights flashed. Her stomach dropped. "No," she whispered. Behind them, a massive Dravashi warship was closing in. It was Vexer's flagship. Even without its leader, the crew wasn't letting them escape without a fight. "They're locking weapons," Aylin said. Daniel clenched his jaw. "Shields up. Give me weapons control." Aylin tapped the console, transferring the system to him. "You sure you can fight like this?" Daniel grinned, despite the pain. "I'll manage." The enemy ship fired first. A plasma beam shot toward them. Aylin jerked the controls, barely dodging. The blast grazed their hull, sending sparks through the cockpit. "That was too close," she shouted. Daniel fired back, launching twin missiles at the enemy vessel. Explosions rocked the warship, but it wasn't enough. Aylin's mind raced. They couldn't win a long fight. Then she saw it, a nearby asteroid field. "Hang on," she yelled. She dove toward the asteroids, weaving through the massive floating rocks. The Dravashi ship followed, struggling to match her speed. Daniel fired at a large asteroid, shattering it into a debris field. The enemy ship slammed into the wreckage, its shields failing. "This is our chance," Daniel shouted. Elin punched the engines to max power. The ship shot forward, breaking free of the asteroid field and entering hyperspace. The stars stretched into infinity, and the Dravashi were left behind. Silence filled the cockpit. Elin slowly released her breath. They had done it. She turned to Daniel. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes closed. For a moment, she panicked, but then he grinned weakly. "Not bad, Elin," he murmured. "Not bad at all." She laughed softly, relief washing over her. "You should rest." Daniel's voice grew quieter. "Yeah, just for a bit." His breathing slowed as he drifted into exhausted sleep. Elin watched him for a moment, her expression softening. Then she turned back to the stars, her eyes filled with a new light. She was finally free. And for the first time in her life, her future was hers to choose.